They smirked behind crystal glasses filled with champagne. My old classmates, dressed in designer labels, raised their eyebrows when I walked in with my husband, Mark, the man they all remembered as the high school janitor. You could almost hear their thoughts, even if they didn't say them out loud. Why would she marry down? Is she still trying to fix lost causes? Poor Charlotte. But I smiled anyway, because I knew something they didn't. They didn't recognize the sharp glint in Mark's eyes, the one I'd seen the day he bought the company that now signed all their paychecks. They didn't know that while they laughed, gossiped, and dismissed him as just a janitor, he was quietly building an empire. And now, tonight, at this reunion gala that they organized, Mark had one final surprise. As the microphone passed to him and the stage lights turned bright, I caught his eye and nodded. It was time. Time for them to learn the hard way what it meant to underestimate a man with grit and the woman who never let go of him. My name is Charlotte Blake, and I'm 42 years old. 15 years ago, I married a man named Mark whom everyone else thought was beneath me. He was kind, honest, hardworking, and at the time, a janitor at the same high school we'd both attended. To my so-called friends and family, it was a punchline. They whispered that I had wasted my education, my ambition, my life. But they didn't see what I saw, a man with vision, patience, and a plan. While they chased fast success and shallow approval, Mark quietly laid the foundation for something far bigger. Years passed, and one by one, those same people came to work for the company he would eventually lead. They never connected the dots. Until the night of our high school reunion. The night my husband stood before them as their new CEO. And I stood beside him, finally ready to watch the tables turn. I grew up in a small but affluent suburb outside Boston. My parents were teachers, hardworking, practical people, but we lived modestly, always just on the edge of wealth without quite touching it. I got a scholarship to a private high school where I quickly learned that money spoke louder than kindness and appearance mattered more than honesty. Even then, I felt like I didn't belong. My clothes weren't designer. My family drove an aging sedan, not a shiny new SUV. And I never went on ski trips or summers in Europe like the others did. That high school shaped me in ways I'm still unlearning. It taught me to smile when I was insulted, to laugh when I felt left out, and to chase the approval of people who wouldn't cross the street to help me if I were bleeding. Mark was different. He wasn't a student. He worked part-time as a janitor, emptying trash cans and mopping hallways while taking night classes at a local community college. He was older by a few years and barely spoke to anyone, but he always nodded when we passed in the hallways. One day, I dropped a stack of books in front of my locker and a group of popular girls giggled rather than help. Mark crouched down, silently handed me each book, and walked away without saying a word. That moment stayed with me. Years later, I bumped into him at a downtown bookstore. I was freshly graduated, with student loans and dreams of becoming a writer. He was studying engineering by then, working security at night to make ends meet. We went for coffee, and it turned into dinner, which turned into something far more enduring. My parents liked him. My friends didn't. They called him that janitor guy. Said I was settling. Warned me I'd be carrying him forever. But I knew who Mark really was. I saw his spreadsheets late at night, his notebooks filled with product designs and market research. He had ideas for improving building systems, automated cleaning mechanisms, energy-saving tools, smarter infrastructure. At the time, they sounded far-fetched. But he believed in them. And I believed in him. We got married in a quiet ceremony, no bridesmaids, no guests from my high school. Just my parents, a few close friends, and Mark's younger brother. We started small. I took freelance writing jobs, sometimes tutoring on the side. Mark worked construction during the day and coded prototypes at night. We couldn't afford cable, barely made rent, but we had each other and a shared belief that one day, things would change. They did. It took years, grants, and endless failures. But eventually, one of Mark's patents caught the attention of a regional facilities company. They bought the design, and suddenly, we weren't scraping by anymore. He reinvested every dollar, built a team, founded his own company, and then he quietly began acquiring competitors. By the time he turned 40, he owned the same building where he used to mop floors. And still, my former classmates had no idea who he was. Not until the night he took the stage with their job security in his hands. The high school reunion invitation came on thick ivory paper, embossed in gold. Celebrating 20 years of success and friendship, it read. I almost laughed. Success and friendship? I remembered the cliques, the whispers, the cruel jokes. And yet, something inside me itched to go. Not for closure, not for nostalgia, but because this time, I wouldn't be arriving alone and overlooked. This time, I'd be walking in beside my husband, Mark, the man they used to call a janitor, now CEO of one of the fastest-growing smart infrastructure firms in the country. Mark wasn't sure about attending. What do we owe these people, Charlotte? He asked one night as we sat on the patio, the stars just beginning to dust the sky. You've already proven them wrong by living well. I smiled. That's true. But sometimes, living well means letting them see it with their own eyes. He looked at me thoughtful. If we go as we are. No fancy speeches. No drama. Just facts. Just facts, I agreed. But deep down, I knew the moment wouldn't be simple. Not for me. The reunion was held at a downtown ballroom, ornate, candlelit, with white linens and gold-trimmed glasses. From the moment we walked in, conversations faltered. Eyes flicked toward us, trying to place the tall, tailored man beside me. I saw familiar faces: Lindsay, who once told me I'd peaked in high school. Derek, who mocked Mark for cleaning the cafeteria. Melissa, who once accidentally spilled juice on my thrift store skirt. Lindsay approached first. She wore a red silk dress and that same high-gloss smile she always used when scanning for status. Charlotte, she purred. Wow, look at you. And who is this? I saw her eyes travel to Mark's watch, his shoes, the subtle confidence in his posture. She didn't recognize him yet. My husband, I said, calm. Mark Blake. She froze, and then blinked. Blake, she repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. As in, Blake Systems. Yes. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back. Well, that's unexpected. The night rippled with moments like that. Murmurs followed us. Eyes lingered too long. But the real moment, the one that changed everything, came during the formal welcome speech. Derek had become something of a local entrepreneur. He ran the very property management firm that Blake Systems had quietly acquired 2 months earlier, though he hadn't yet received news of the leadership restructure. With a champagne flute in hand and smugness etched into every word, Derek raised a toast. To the future and to those of us who built our success from the ground up. Not everyone peaked in high school, after all. Laughter. Applause. I felt my stomach twist. And then Mark stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't command attention. He simply walked to the mic and cleared his throat. I'm Mark Blake, CEO of Blake Systems. As of this week, we've finalized the acquisition of several regional maintenance portfolios, including the properties managed by Derek's firm. The room went silent. Derek's face paled. I look forward to working with many of you, Mark added, pausing just long enough to let the weight of his words settle. And I hope we all remember, true value isn't always visible at first glance. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was the spark. And I knew, from the look on Mark's face, that this was only the beginning. After the reunion, word spread like wildfire. A few polite follow-up emails arrived, sprinkled with false nostalgia and veiled curiosity, people trying to confirm what they had witnessed. It was amusing to watch them squirm, those same classmates who once whispered behind my back, now trying to rewrite history with syrupy compliments. But the fallout was heavier for Mark. Within 2 weeks of the event, Derek's board received official notification. Due diligence had revealed multiple inefficiencies in his management. 2 of his senior staff were asked to step aside. Mark had been patient during the acquisition, letting the existing leadership operate untouched until that night. He didn't act vindicatively. He acted strategically. Derek had mocked Mark for being just a janitor in school. Now Mark was his boss. And Derek couldn't handle it. The phone calls started coming in late. Derek begged for a meeting with the real decision-makers. Mark politely declined. "You're welcome to email me directly," he said once, then never answered again. Meanwhile, I watched as Lindsay posted photo after photo on social media, every one of them trying to recapture the illusion of youth and importance. But her real estate ventures had been floundering. We knew because one of Mark's firms had bid on a distressed commercial property she'd over-leveraged. "I don't want to destroy her," Mark said one night. "But I won't pass on a smart investment." "She never thought twice about humiliating us," I replied. "Do what's right for the business." That building deal went through, and Lindsay's name was quietly removed from the signage. She didn't post about it. A few months later, I got a message from Melissa, the girl who once spilled juice on my skirt and called it clumsy. She'd started a boutique PR firm focused on female empowerment. Irony wasn't lost on me. "Hi, Charlotte. I'd love to collaborate sometime. Your story is so inspiring." I didn't respond. But I didn't delete the message either. Weeks passed, and the anniversary of my mother's passing approached. Mark and I visited her grave as we did every year. She'd always told me that kindness was stronger than cruelty, but that silence in the face of injustice wasn't virtue, it was surrender. That voice rang in my ears when Melissa reached out again. This time, she asked to feature me in a panel event about resilience and success. I agreed under one condition: she would introduce me honestly, by the full arc of my story, not the polished revision she wanted to market. When the night of the event came, the room was filled with faces who once rolled their eyes when I raised my hand in class. Melissa's expression cracked as I told the audience, once, I wore the same dress to school 2 days in a row because it was the only one I had. A girl spilled juice on it and laughed. A few people turned toward her in recognition. Melissa turned red. That day didn't break me. It reminded me who I never wanted to become. Applause followed. Melissa tried to smile. But her brand had taken a hit, and she knew it. Ironically, her followers loved the speech, but not her response. She was too insincere to mask her discomfort. By winter, Mark's company had expanded into 3 new regions. One of those markets included a struggling historic hotel, an architectural beauty in need of investment. Guess who had a minority stake in it? Lindsay. Again. She was desperately trying to flip the property to cover losses. We bought it, through a shell holding, and restored it. When it reopened, we hosted a fundraising gala there for inner-city education. I made the keynote address. As I stood on the balcony of that grand hall, dressed in deep navy silk, I scanned the crowd. I saw the principal of our former school, teachers who once overlooked the cruelty happening in the halls, and a few familiar alumni pretending not to know me. I started my speech with a single sentence. They laughed when I married a janitor. Silence fell. But what they didn't know is that janitors see everything people try to throw away. The room tensed. Trash. Value. Dignity. And sometimes, a person who simply needs a second chance. I married someone the world underestimated, and I did it without needing to diminish anyone else. But many of you can't say the same. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The fallout after the gala was swift. Melissa's PR firm lost 2 major clients who'd attended. Lindsay went silent online for nearly 6 months. Derek? He was forced to resign after his final project failed to meet standards. He now manages a small property in a distant suburb. Mark didn't fire him. He simply made the promotion requirements unachievable for someone who refused to grow. We never screamed. We never threatened. We just showed up, as we were, and let the truth do the rest. The real revenge wasn't in money. It wasn't even in power. It was in being seen, fully, as we truly were, not as the caricatures they once painted us to be. And when that moment came, the final stroke of vindication, it arrived not with shouting or scandal, but with unshakable clarity. It happened on a bright spring morning, nearly a year after the reunion. Mark received a personal request from the board to take over the CEO role permanently. The transition had already been underway behind the scenes, but now it was official. He wasn't just acting CEO. He was the CEO. He signed the contract quietly and slid the folder back across the table. Then he turned to his assistant and said, "Schedule the town hall." 2 weeks later, we stood in the gleaming atrium of corporate headquarters, surrounded by staff, executives, and press. This was Derek's old domain. But now, the employees greeted Mark with genuine respect. Not fear. Not obligation. Respect. He stepped onto the podium, composed as ever. "When I first started here, I emptied trash bins and scrubbed tile floors. I knew every corner of this building long before I ever walked through its boardroom doors. That work taught me something most executives forget. How people treat those they think are beneath them tells you everything." There were nods. Some uncomfortable shifting in chairs. I was told I'd never rise above that. That I should know my place. But I had someone who believed in me, long before anyone else did. My wife. He looked at me then. My heart pounded. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. She saw who I was even when the world couldn't. And because of that, I'm standing here today. Not just because of skill or luck, but because someone gave me the dignity of being fully seen. The applause was thunderous. Later that evening, a private dinner was held for legacy shareholders and former executives. I didn't plan to attend, but Mark insisted. When I arrived, I noticed Lindsay seated at the far end of the room, lips pressed in a rigid line. Derek was at the bar, nursing something amber and clearly too strong. I passed through the tables slowly. People stood to greet me now. I was no longer an outsider. And then I saw it, the painting. Hung behind the head of the table was the original architectural rendering of the first headquarters. It used to include the names of the company's founders. Now, a new plaque read, "Restored and rededicated in honor of Mark and Charlotte Evans for their vision, integrity, and resilience." Resilience. That word stayed with me, because it wasn't about revenge as much as it was about weathering what should have broken you and becoming stronger for it. When the dinner ended, Derek approached Mark with a hollow attempt at reconciliation. Mark simply extended his hand, shook it, and said, "We all rise or fall by the choices we make. I wish you better ones next time." Lindsay said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the plaque for a long time before she left without a word. And that was it. No shouting. No cruelty. Just the undeniable truth. They had tried to make us feel small. But now we were too big to ignore. Now, years later, I often walk through the company's campus, watching young interns rush between meetings, their notebooks clutched tightly in hand, their eyes full of hope. None of them know the full story of how Mark became their CEO. To them, he's simply the leader who treats them like people. Who remembers their birthdays? Who walks the floors on Fridays to check in, not from obligation, but from genuine care? I still work part-time, consulting in community outreach. But mostly I write now. Stories, reflections, moments from our strange, winding journey. Sometimes I'm invited to speak at women's groups, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that being underestimated is often the greatest gift. Because once people stop watching, you're free to build without their noise. Mark and I live in a modest house outside the city. He never wanted the mansion. Too far from the ground, he'd said. And maybe that's why he led with grace instead of vengeance. Because we'd come from the ground. We knew what it meant to be stepped over. As for those who laughed, Derek retired early. After his ousting, no company would touch him. A few half-hearted attempts at consulting led nowhere. Last I heard, he was selling real estate and rarely mentioned the company he once ruled. Lindsay vanished from the industry. She married a venture capitalist and moved to the coast. Occasionally, I see curated glimpses of her life online: yoga retreats, designer handbags, smiles that don't quite reach her eyes. But I don't check often. Because revenge, in the end, is not about staying tethered to the people who hurt you. It's about breaking free, about reclaiming your story on your own terms. What stayed with me most, however, wasn't the applause, the praise, or even the vindication. It was one quiet moment, a year after the promotion, when I came home late and found Mark sitting on our porch, barefoot, watching the trees sway. "You okay?" I asked. He looked at me, smiled, and said they thought being a janitor made me small. But it taught me how to notice everything. That's what this life taught us. That strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it scrubs floors quietly. It wakes up early. It endures laughter without reply. And when the time is right, it steps into the light not to gloat, but simply to be seen. Tell me, have you ever been laughed at for who you loved, only to realize you saw the treasure before anyone else did?